will give the floor to him just in a moment. Maxim Vilkov is the director of Interregional Public Movement for Democracy and Human Rights. You have quite big stars here. So one of them is now in Poland at a different conference, and it's Akhmed Yarlykapov. If he asked if you could give the floor to him first. If you don't mind, Viktor, we will give the floor to him first. And so, Maxim, the floor is yours. So, good luck. Thank you very much, Valerie. Dear colleagues, I'm very happy to welcome you here today. My name is Maxim Vilkov, and I remind you that the time limit is 10 minutes per speaker and 5 minutes for questions and answers. If you don't meet the time limit of 10 minutes, you can still speak for 15 minutes, no problem. We also have translation, and if somebody would speak English, or if somebody wants to listen the speakers speaking in Russian in English, you can actually push the button, the globe icon, and choose the language you want to listen to. I would ask you to send your questions through the chat. That would be much easier for everybody. That's it, I guess. And Mr. Yarlykapov, Mr. Yarlykapov, the candidate of Historical Sciences, the senior researcher at the Moscow Institute of International Relations at MGIMO, Russia. So he will speak about ISIS and the North Caucasus. If you don't mind, I will switch on my presentation right now. So, speaking about my research and sources, I did field research in Dagestan, in Astrakhan, in Moscow, in Yamalo-Nenetsk region in 2014, 2019, 2018. I interviewed those families who went to Syria, with those who went to Syria and came back, with the friends and families of those who went to Syria, and with the members of the law enforcement agencies. I have very interesting information from the Ministry of the Youth of the Republic of Dagestan. They had a very good sociology of their research and their study. They covered quite a lot of people living in the Republic. This was a great monitoring from their part. And I also used the research by the sociologists from Dagestan of 2015-2016, headed by Zaid Abdulagatov, who is one of the most prominent scientists of Dagestan. So, speaking about the North Caucasus and ISIS, people from this region very actively participated in the activities, and they represent the majority of people who came from Russia. Only from Dagestan, there were 5,000 people who went there. This is unprecedented. And it is also has some basis from sociological research. Who were they? They were youth from 16 to 28, but also they were some senior citizens. For example, two people from Novy Urengoy. These were people who had just several months till their retirement. But most of the part went not directly from the North Caucasus, but from the north, from the Western Siberia, and from big cities from the central Russia. As of September 2014, we see 15 people joining ISIS, and at least 4 of them were from Khanty-Mansi region. They used very interesting system of recruitment of these people. It was very well organized, and very often they say about the leading role of the internet propaganda, but it was used by several individual recruitment officers. So this recruitment was not chaotic. This was recruitment of IT specialists, of doctors, of other very useful, represent very useful professions. Speaking about the sociology, the data is extremely interesting, coming from the Ministry of Youth of the Republic of Dagestan. And again, they covered more than 3,000 young people. Over 8.1% were ready to join ISIS. So, and just imagine 8% were ready to join ISIS, and about 30% decided that it was possible. So the share of these people who wanted to join ISIS was pretty high in 2014, 2015. Why? 43% said they cannot be successful in the current context in Dagestan. 24% said that the local authorities stimulate the Salafite sentiments among youth, and 11% decided that Salafism is the best religion for Dagestan. And I'm stress it's Salafism. A very illustrative question was asked: why the situation in Dagestan getting worse? And the answers are pretty interesting. 15% said it's corruption, 23% lack of social justice, and the 13% that said that they lack programs targeted on youth. So most of the people said that they support Russia in Syria, with 40% not supporting these actions. But at the same time, 15% noted that Islamic State is the true caliphate, and 15% said that it's probably is the true caliphate. At the same time, 20% said that they do not trust local and federal authorities.
The data is smaller, but still it shows the main idea. Almost 5% said that they support citizens of Dagestan who are fighting for ISIS, and around 9% probably support. There it was 8%, here it was 3.5% who said that are ready to join ISIS, and 7.2% replied that they would probably join ISIS. And there was another interesting question: could they be patriots of non-Sharia state? And almost 20% of young citizens of Dagestan said that under no circumstances could they be patriots of non-Sharia state. So this is very interesting. Human dimension is very important for us. Thousands of young people with families and small kids just took off and went to ISIS. And when you analyze why and what happened, it's interesting that there was no previous protest of poor and miserable. Usually it was were successful young people who are not directly connected with poverty or corruption or the problem of the glass ceiling. So all these people actually had everything. In 2016, I participated in one conference. There was the press secretary of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Republic of Dagestan. She said honestly that 80% of the ones who left Dagestan were the kids of the authority and the workers of police. They're actually the people who have nothing to do with the poverty, with the corruption, and the problem of glass ceiling. If you are a kid of or the son of someone from the authorities, you have everything. So this is around 80% of people who left. This is supported by the field materials that I gathered myself from the interviews of the relatives of those who left to Syria or the ones who left and came back. This is supported by this interview completely. For example, I was in Durban in September 2019, and I got interviews from the relatives of the ones who left, and I talked with the representatives of both sides, and there was a son and a daughter. A son left with a wife and 3 daughters, and he also got another son already there. He was a lawyer. He graduated with honors. He graduated from the Faculty of Law from Dagestan State University. The relatives didn't know anything. They had first one room apartment, then 3-room apartment. So they just sold it without telling relatives and just left. And there is the majority of stories like this. There is no protest from the poor and miserable. A lot of successful people participate in it, and this is a huge question. Why are there so many educated successful people who left to ISIS? And there are no simple answers, I guess, and there could not be any simple answers. Of course, the situation in the region affected it, but another important part was the issue of social fairness. We can see that successful people left, and from the interviews we can see that none of them were actually practicing Muslims before leaving for ISIS. And I would say that this public background actually helped to recruit them. I think I managed the timing, so if you have any questions, I'm ready to answer. Yes, thank you very much. The perfect 10 minutes. We can see the school of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Dear participants, if you have any questions, I would like to say that first I wanted to text, but then I just wanted to say that this is a great speech, great facts. Thank you very much for finding time, and we really ask you to send us the text when we're going to publish the edition and the presentation, because it needs to be published. This is very important information. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry that I cannot participate any longer. I have to go. I have to run. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Viktor Shnirelman, the Doctor of Historical Science, the representative of Institute of Ethnology and Anthropology of the Russian Academy of Science, the chief researcher. With his speech, Heroic Past, Xenophobia, Propaganda, and Symbolic Language. You have the floor, Victor. Thank you very much. We know that those who distribute xenophobic sentiments are trying to influence the emotions of the public and are using huge range of means. And what is also important, I'm going to talk about later, a lot of modern anti-Semists are trying to be cautious. They're trying not to use very direct anti-Semist means, and they're using a lot of euphemism, metaphors, links to and references to different myths that they create themselves. They mention a lot of different Jewish names and last names. So in other words, radical ideas are not always expressed directly. Trying to run away from the legal responsibility and law enforcement, they're trying to use euphemism. For example, they're saying people of biblical foreign. One person actually came up with the term Jerusalem instead of Jewish, Colorado instead of swastikas, international bankers instead of international Zionists. Sometimes they use the term gray. And this euphemism are easily understood by those who know the specifics of the myth and the myth-related words, and they are using different terms always, and that helps them to come away from the responsibility. They're also talking about different ages, different heroes. It helps to understand the idea, but it helps to avoid the law enforcement. And at the same time, they're usually dispersed across the text, and it's hard to collect all the mentions and all the terms, because usually we're talking about huge voluminous books. Usually we're talking about linguistic expertise, and philologists are gathered for this expertise, and they're usually too far from this topic, and so they cannot find anything if they don't know anything about this myths and metaphors. It's also important to pay attention to the keywords and the context that's understood by those who understand the idea of the myth. For example, the term Khazars and the idea of the fact that Vladimir's mother was Khazar Jewish woman, and it's connected with the anti-Semist Khazar myth that they're trying to impose their yoke on Russia. They're also giving a lot of references to radical literature that the reader is supposed to know already, and this is done in order to include this literature into the political context. Also, a certain part of information is given in illustrations and symbols and without any comments. For example, the 8-pointed swastika or colorat, which has the same meaning for politicized pagans as the swastika for Hitler. So this swastika is the favorite symbol and quite often can be seen in different literature features. Another popular symbol like a Celtic cross and swastika should influence the emotions of the reader and impose negative feelings towards others. At the same time, the ideas can be interpreted differently, and when one group of people can see one thing in that literature, others can see something else. So in some cases, this analysis of the text can say pretty much nothing, and so people can easily avoid the law enforcement forces. We have to say that it was done even during the Soviet times. Even in April 1980, there was an evening dedicated to the Kulikov battle, and very famous Shapunov said, quote unquote, like our pre-ancestors got out of the yoke, we need to overcome the Mason. a lot of different symbols are used, and with this metaphysical point of view, something that was happening in the past is also happening right now. The society is the body with different attributes, and the enemies are still the same. This instrumental use of the past with the far right propaganda is what is called the policy of the past. This is used by different mass media and also radical websites and different speeches, especially in the literature. And the fantasies in it usually look very pleasant, and the reader can spread these ideas without even understanding that they disperse the propaganda. For the past 10 years, I studied 4 myths that are used. This is Aryan myth, Hazar myth, the myth about the Antichrist, and also Conflictology. That is quite popular right now. Some of the participants already talked about it. So the Aryan myth is talked about in the Aryan edition, and Aryans are becoming the barriers of the global evil. In this context, the Aryans and the Semites are the different on the different sides of the pole. Aryans are coming from the Hyperborea, and Semites from Atlantida. In short, Aryans are the eternal good, and the Semites are the eternal bad. And that means that they need to eliminate each other. So, according to that myth, the world is destined to the battle of these two sides. And in this context, the history of Russia is just the history of the Semit yoke, and we need to destroy this yoke and achieve the prosperity. It's interesting that this myth is not limited by the marginals right now, but it's also supported by some political scientists and philosophers who are showing the opposition between Russia and the West as the Atlantida and Hyperborea contradiction. And next one is the Hazarian myth. I also talked about it. Hazars are the predator country that is aimed at destroying the Russian people. And here they're also talking about the ghostly yoke and the elimination of Russian people. It included the events on the Caucasus. Some of the Russian authors find a lot of people from the Caucasus with to be the relatives of those nations. Some of the Russian nationalists considered the events on the Maidan as the actual attempt to develop the war between Russians and Ukrainians. And at that point, the idea of Hazars was understood as the enemy. So during our times, the xenophobic discussions usually use a lot of symbolic language in attempt to get some of the information to people without getting into law enforcement, because no one is going to sue you for the hazards. This language is based on code language that cover its initial meaning. These terms are quite often used from the historic narrative, and it can be understood by those who understand this narrative. Sometimes they're talking about real historic events that is connected with this nation or people, but sometimes with the collisions that were happening in a completely different cultural environment.
современным историческим событиям и процессам острого
They sound relevant, which are very acutely perceived by the population. Sometimes we speak about sci-fi books, the literary works, and also the Dallas Plan and other things. Such narrative should be known to the audience, and it should be comprised of pretty intellectual people. It should include the visiting of lectures, the learning about the culture and using websites. Such a vision of the social reality should be based on some constants and allowing some peripheral positions, but there still should be a very solid nucleus. And in the latest decades, we have the vision of the culture, and we also should have the vision of the always existing threats. So here we speak about different cultural and social processes. These processes should not be connected with the internal processes rather than with the external processes, and the actions of external threat. Sometimes they are associated with Jews or Turkish or with other people or with Jews or with a confessional or with different faiths or with some others, some people who are not like us. So here we speak not about local problems, but the bigger problems such as genocide or threat to survival. It should appeal to the emotions of the society. And here we see the frustrations which go to external threats. So the myths that I mentioned very well complete the other one. Some of them are used as a complementary part to the Aryan myth, and sometimes they sound even more convincing. Sometimes this myth cover the whole world. The Khazar myth is integrated into the whole history, and I guess that this is it. Though I would be glad to speak more about conspirology, so we have the time limit that doesn't allow for that. So that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Viktor. Thank you for a very interesting report. True, if you allow me as a moderator to say a few words, that the symbolic language which is used by you, I mean, not you specifically, but all people are used, it determines a lot, and it shapes the perception of what we see around us, and that's what we see not only in Russia but also in the neighboring countries. So thank you very much, Viktor. And now I give the floor to Semyon Charny, to the candidate of historical sciences and chairman of the Scientific Council of the Institute of Ethnic Policy and Interethnic Relations, who will talk about dynamics of extremist crime in the Russian Federation in 2000 to 2021. So Semen, over to you.
Семен, вы нас слышите?
Semen, can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you. It's very hard to listen to hear you, so could you please move closer to the mic? Unfortunately, that's impossible. I can't sit closer to the computer, unfortunately. So let it be it. So I will speak about the xenophobic crimes in Russia. Of course, not about all of them, but about some acts, about some vandalism, the acts of vandalism, and that's what we see in the media. And sometimes these xenophobic statements are printed in the media. And this term sometimes is used, but it's we don't know how many acts. We don't know. So speaking about vandalism, so it's the situation is a little bit easier because we see the physical evidence. So what happened in the last 20 years? So by the end of 1990s, of course, nothing. This doesn't come from nothing. So some terrorist groups appeared, the skinhead groups, and at that time, the killings based on ethnicity were pretty rare. If we take, if you look at the beginning, in the early 2000s, we had about 5 to 10 people murdered and about 100 instances of such crimes. So what do I base my research on? It is based on monitoring devoted to the situation related to xenophobia in Russia. So these are all open sources. Sometimes the statistics had to be changed. Maxim Bartsankevich case is pretty known. He was connected to about 9 killings. It appeared that he committed even more crimes. So the main group that Russian skinhead targeted were the foreign students in big cities, or people from the Caucasus. In the middle of 2000s, the situation changes completely. So it's now the target is the migrants. So the main enemy is the migrants, and the main organization at the time was the illegal immigrants. It was pretty thriving, and we see that the number of attacks is growing. And as there are no counteractions, so the number of attacks is growing and the number of victims is also growing. If in 2004 there were 69 attacks, next year we see 200 attacks, 25 dead. In 2006 we have 210 attacks and more victims. There we see the peak years, 2009, 2010. We have over 320 victims in these attacks. in 2008. You have over 128 people dead. And in 2009, we see 79 people dead. Why do we see this spike? This is the moment of thriving of radical organizations and the constant propaganda of what's called the race war. It has its consequences. We have the skin bands who believe that you need to start a war and you need to cleanse our city from other nations. And these groups actually are responsible for most part of the people dead and of the victims. These are the people from Moscow and St. Petersburg. Then we have Ijevsk in terms of the number of victims. But these actions, these attacks happen from Moscow to Vladivostok, as we say. And it's due to two things. First of all, the state understands that it played for a long time in the game. And I want to mention that the first hearings resulted in just several years of imprisonment, which didn't scare you a lot. So in 4 to 5 years, you will be free and you will fight for the clear and cleansed Russia. But then in 2008, 2009, the situation changed, and we see what I call the Putin-Medvedev reform, which started by Putin and which will be continued by Medvedev. What happened? So first of all, we see stricter criminal laws. Before that, the article on the racial range was just one article, and then we see a number of articles devoted to that. So we had first just murder, and then we had murder based on the ethnic reasons, which led to more years in prison. So it's aggravated the situation of those who were caught, and they had to serve over 10 years. So you actually could get from 10 to 15 years in prison. And the second thing is that we had established the Centers for Fighting Against Extremism. Initially, they were established to fight against the skinheads. So the local authorities who were interested in that, they really wanted to get their bonuses for finding these people. So it led to better activities, and we had people who were interested in that. So as a result, so the first wave of this radicalization was fought. And in 2009, so it's the situation, well, was getting better. So, and I've already mentioned the figures, so 79 victims. Then we had like a fall in 2010, in 2011. So we had 143 victims. and then fewer and fewer people. Then we have another spike. It started in 2012. In 2011 is like the year with the fewest number of victims, only 29 people dead. But unfortunately, we have again another increase. 49 people dead in 2011. So the new people apparently came to the organization. Then we have a rise again. And then we see that since 2014, we see a sort of lowering numbers. So we have only 25 people who are victims. So we have fewer and fewer people who become victims. Why does it happen? So this reduction continues, and the number of victims is less than 100, and the number of people that is just less than 10 people. So that's a lot. That's a lot less than before. Why is this happening? So here we have two things. First of all, we have a very strict governmental control. Before that, the skinheads were just on their own, and now they are monitored, and if needed, now they are very closely monitored and controlled. So before, and it's done to avoid further violence, so that they do not target politicians or journalists. So if you commit, if you commit a crime, you can actually get more years in prison. Second thing is the war in Donbass, in Syria. So those people who just want to take weapons and fight, they have other opportunities. Of course, they have also an opportunity or a chance to get killed, but still. So former skinheads, they got killed in Syria or in Ukraine.
The situation is that most everything is okay in the capital. Dear Semen, I would ask you to come to conclusion, because we have regulations timing. The figures are minimal in the capitals, but what we lack here is that if we remove this pressure, then all of these figures will rise quickly. Because according to the social poll, there are a lot of different tensions in the people's opinions. Dear Semen, unfortunately, I have to stop you. Yes, excuse me. Thank you very much for this very informative speech, but unfortunately we have a certain timing. Now I give the floor to Rinat Pateyev, candidate of historical sciences, director of the Center for Islamic Studies of the Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Tatarstan. Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me? I would like to correct you. I'm a candidate of political sciences. I'm a political scientist. It's not a problem. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate here for another invitation. Our Center for Islamic Studies studies the radical environment from 2017. These are the people who participated in the extremist terrorist attacks and the participants of their families. We had around 400 deep interviews, and we had to do it both in the freedom and also in prisons. So with the people who are now serving a sentence. I would like to talk about several hypotheses that we are basing our decisions on, and regarding the problem that we're talking about. The first question is what came first, radicalization or indoctrination? In many texts of our state authorities and structures, we have the prevention of the ideology. But when we're actually doing it, we are saying that social radicalization is actually first compared to the indoctrination, because a normal person who is in a normal socio-psychological situation will not be affected by these ideas, but that person who will find himself in difficult situations, then they start to immerse into this ideological thing. So what are these people in terms of social background? These are usually raised by not full families. The migration story that we're talking about in Tatarstan, we have a lot of multinational families, thank God. Yeah, like we said, these are the people who cannot completely understand for themselves whether they're Tatar or Russian. So there are a lot of different factors, and sometimes the final stage of the radicalization is connected with some tragical situations, the loss of a close person, some acute stop or break of the sport career because of the traumas. So each case is, of course, individual. I've seen a lot of different stories, and it's actually true that quite often they're talking about the intergenerational conflict, and this was a means of the conflict. For example, they would join ISIS not because of the ideologies, but for some because of some long conflict with their parents. Another hypothesis is a key hypothesis for us. What is radicalization connected in the Islamist community? We're talking about jihadists, the problem of blaming for not having faith, but we're paying attention to the fact that this interpretation and this definition is not separated from the general violence that can be seen not just in ideological environment, but also in the literature or music or audiovisual products. Here we can give a lot of different examples, starting from the part of Chechen jihadists, who kind of reminded the Soviet Bart song, like Timur Musarayev, and also the product of other people that is created with the use of a lot of different audiovisual effects, and it looks kind of like an advertising and entertaining product. But this is actually a terrorist act. It's actually killing people when people are actually buried alive. And ISIS actually used a lot of different unusual images. For example, we all saw in Russia the picture around next to the Reichstag, when they said that we're going to have our own 9th of May. And there are a lot of facts like this when I'm giving lectures and showing symbols. Young people are looking at it and are smiling, even though I'm saying that this is bad. When this product brings this kind of emotions to us, it's kind of funny, it's kind of hype. So this is some sort of a social world point of view aspect. Another interesting moment is that our researches by Tredinov showed that he was talking about the motivation of the terrorists. This is some sort of consumerist attribute. When, for example, you're not praying, you're not following the Sharia laws, but then you go down to the metro station, you push the suicide button, and you think that you're the Islamist. And the interpretations show that this is the reflection of the consumerist culture. This is the problem of the modern world. This can sound very brave, but I found information not long ago that in London, a jihadist was stopped. His last name is very complicated. He's probably the origins from the Pakistan or somewhere. So when I saw those plans of that person, I'm just going to read. To choose the palace to meet with the wives and choose the main one, to ornament the palace, to have the party, and only on the 6th place his plan was to meet the prophet. So only the 6th point was some religious idea. And this sort of aspects, and this motivation of the extreme radicalism and terrorism actually exists. And switching to the final part, I would like to say that Islamic scientists on the form of transformation, and it's connected not only with the politics, with economy and ideology, but also with the fact that Islamic societies are becoming the part of this whole global reality, some sort of trend. This leads to certain reactions. For example, traditional fundamentalism in the traditional religions. This is some sort of battle for the God. So today, there is another trend that we pay a lot of attention to. The Islamic radicalism is giving its place to other forms. For example, what happened in Kazan or in Perm. In both cases, we unfortunately heard Tatar last names. This is a weird situation. For those who participated in that, it shows that Tatar community were to blame. And we can say that school shooting started as an illness in the United States, but now it's the modern problem with a lot of different consequences. These are young people from the multi-apartment buildings, and their parents are building their career and paying the mortgage. You can read the emotions of one of the mothers of the firm shooter. She was talking about her son in the past tense, even when he was not condemned. It shows that that son did not exist for her anymore. There is a decay in the multi-generational clash. There is a lack of traditional social control in terms of family. When Mr. Akhmed was saying that it's weird that these are new saints, but actually I don't think there's anything weird about it. Because they're usually successful people who do not find time for their kids. And I think this is importantly our reality, and our psychologists noticed that in almost 100% of cases, this is what happens, and the parents do not have time for their kids. And this is another question of the conservative values. Unfortunately, for many people, family is something archaic, even though it's pretty problematic and dubious for me. When we're talking about Islam, this is the state where they have the official clergy. But if we're talking about the values, family should still be a unit, very important unit, but now it's decreasingly less important in our world. And these young people from the multi-apartment buildings are left alone one-on-one with their computers, and the consequences is that they can be affected by the radicalism ideas. So unfortunately, that's what we see today. Thank you very much. I hope that I managed the timing. Yes, yes, great. If you have any questions, unfortunately, I have to leave. We have a couple of minutes, so we can ask questions. Yes, yes, we have some time. So, colleagues, if you have any questions, you can ask them, because the speaker will leave soon, and now you have an opportunity to discuss. If someone comes up with questions, I'm just going to leave my email address, and if you have any comments or questions, you can email me and I'll be glad to reply. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rinat. And now I give the floor to Rizda Mahmudova, the candidate of historic science, associate professor of the chair of the Conflictology of the Kazan Federal University, with her speech limitations and possibilities of radicalization, analysis of Muslim women in Russia. Rizda, you have the floor. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity. Now I switch on my presentation. I think that you can see it, right? Yes, now we can see it. You can switch the full screen version. No, it's at the bottom. You can find that symbol.
Ну, неважно, можно так, начинайте.
It doesn't matter, you can start like this. Yes, okay. I'm just gonna say something about myself. I'm representing the University of Kazan. Me and my colleague prepared the presentation, and our understanding of what is a radicalized Muslim woman is and what are the complications on this path. So the thing is, for the subject of the research, according to the framework of this research, can be women who are in a difficult situation can be analyzed. Also the women who are on the verge of radicalization. And then it's more interesting to get information about women who had the real experience in participating in the terrorist activity. These are the wives of the militia. I'm not gonna talk about it in detail. I just want to say that big experience in de-radicalization of this category of women can be found in Kazakhstan. I'm gonna talk about this a bit as well. The conflict scientists have to be glad that some of these women left ISIS. And these are the women who went through rehabilitation programs after they came back, and they're participating in the socially positive activity. For the researcher who is not included in this specialized system, I think it's important that the access to these women and holding different interviews with them will help to shed light on the problems. What else is important is that the analysis is happening usually after the conflict took place, after the women left, and after they successfully came back to their place of residence. Usually this contact is not possible because you need to first create the trust, and I have a hypothesis that this category of women will identify themselves as a subject of scientific research. And I guess in order to avoid this, the representatives of scientific society need to previously have some social contacts with this category of people. And what else is interesting is that we can see in general what is the role of women in providing the national security, what is their potential in the de-radicalization process and in radicalization process. Next slide. The relevance of the topic is that we have the experience that we had in Kazakhstan. We had a whole operation. This information is widely spread. And what were the difficulties of the specialists who participated in that operation? And based on this operation, there was a whole book published. The author is, it can be seen on this screen. And the relevance is written on the screen as well by me. As Rinat said, of course, the question of religious institutes and this religious factor in the radicalization and the de-radicalization is quite interesting, especially interesting.
All the researchers need to understand how many women are faced with this issue in the region. and speaking about Kazakhstan that I mentioned before, is that the number of children, the number of women who returned, and the information regarding their rehabilitation place, rehabilitation site is this information is closed. The next thing is that the religious actors in their official agenda, well, at least speaking about Kazakhstan, I didn't see the female face of this issue, though in the media we see extensive information about the religious actors' activities regarding these women. So we have quite a lot of information about that. But speaking about the female issue and whether there is some kind of contact, we don't know, but still there is no information in the media. Other issues regarding the research, the women are isolated and feel stigmatized, and they do not want to go back to normal life due to this drama that happened in their life. Another issue is that in case of this, if this radicalization took place due to Islam, so the question is when we could spot it and take some preventive measures to identify this issue. And this is also the question of trust. Why did they lose it? And why did they choose other ideology and ideological dimension? Now, speaking about the opportunities, we had the opportunity to meet, to study women who actually were experienced radicalization. They were faced with the personal rehabilitation. We also studied the activity of the crisis centers, and if speaking about the general situation, what's interesting is that the graduates or the students who are studying in the madrasa, this is a religious institution, how they can counteract and how they can provide and ensure this religious security for them in case they face a very hard situation. And finally, the analysis of the programs which exist and which are covered in the internet, in the media, in research, they exist. We know the experience of individual countries, and we can understand what are the challenges that exist. But speaking about our Russian realities, there are not so many of this research. Last but one slide here. So we can identify the interest of this female which exists in the regarding the local authorities, regarding education and healthcare, because here we can find a lot of conflicts, and the way out is the only one is the active civil position, attention to the radicalized Muslims, and they we also can analyze and systematize the cases that exist and using the scientific analysis. Thank you very much. So I did my best to meet the time limits. Thank you very much for a very interesting report, for a very interesting presentation, and for meeting the time limit. Are there any questions to the speaker? If there are no questions, then I give the floor. I have one question. Maybe it's not relevant. What Akhmed told us about Dagestan, that the radicalization covered quite a lot of people. Well, he said that radicalization in general concerns youth, and these are many youth from elite. They are pretty well off. They are not faced with poverty. But what's the situation is like in Tatarstan, and what's the situation is like among women? So thank you very much for your question. Those women that went through this, it allows me to say that they joined the organization when they were very young, when they were about 18, saying that they saw some kind of future prospects for them. Well, I can't say that actually. I wouldn't say that these were pretty well-off people who knew what they wanted to do in future. It's very hard to say. So it's very hard to speak about prospects, but what kind of layers of the society did they represent? So these are people, what they called from the workers layer. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vizida. Now I give the floor to Mikhail Avakyan, who is the candidate of legal sciences and the director of the Kant University, who will speak about the counter actions with school shooting. Good day, dear colleagues. Can you hear me clearly? Yes, the sound is perfect. First of all, I wanted to thank for the opportunity to speak and to be present at this very interesting event. And I personally wanted to thank Valery Engel for the invitation. I also wanted to thank the organizers. This is very interesting event, and now I switch between the two streams because here and there I see a very lively and very evidence-based reports, and I hopefully I will be able to listen to to all of the reports. Taking into account the time limit, I wanted to mention several things. Speaking as the representative of youth, so the youth cannot critically percept the information, which leads to illegal actions. And taking into account the solidarization with terrorist activities, very often we see xenophobia and religious violence and the school shooting. Today, I wanted to speak about the school shooting. This is the product of globalization, which in general sense should be understood as violence in education when a student commits some actions aimed at murdering or harming other students or the faculty. Taking into account the peculiarities of our session, the first incident happened in April 1999 in Columbine school, where two school children killed two other students and one teacher and about 20 other people. They didn't quite realize what they did, but they were very well known in the media, and the Columbine word actually became associated with school shooting. The mass violence in the US accounts for about 570 people in the US. Before that, the situation, until recently, the school shooting was just the American thing, but now in 2014 they started to become part of the Russian reality. Now, this kind of deviant behavior is very studied in Russia. We see several institutions created, associations and programs to prevent terrorism among youth. However, the acute character of the problem requires evidence-based solutions and very great interest towards this topic from many actors of the civil society leads to the wrong interpretation of what's going on. So people who are responsible for preventing terrorism among youth do not take into account the specifics of the school shooting. They just see it as a terrorist act, or they insist that this phenomenon is just a consequence of the popular culture. For now, there are no good requirements and for fighting this problem. Of course, we have some methodology, but they are mostly theoretical ones. They are not based on research and on the judicial practice, which should be taken into account from my point of view. The representatives of the school that I represent decided to make an objective and decided to study school shooting as a separate phenomenon. It is based on several evidence. It's far from being complete. However, I can share with you some of the results of this research. One of the components of our research was the monitoring and the survey in Kaliningrad region. We had a questionnaire for school children. Among the respondents were about 1,600 students and 320 school teachers. It concerns several types of different behavior. What are our results? First of all, more 15% of students said that they lack communication. So over 140 people have just one friend. 63% of the respondents mentioned that there are some students that no one communicates with. About 25% said that they faced with extremism in cyberspace. However, over 60% of the school children never participated in anti-extremism or anti-terrorist activities in their schools, which makes us believe that there were no events of such character. We also learned that the main source of information is television. 64% of respondents learned about the issue of terrorism from TV, and only 20% learned about it from internet or from the special books. What's most worrying is that only about half of the respondents among teachers first learned about school teaching during our questionnaire, and 72% of teachers never went through special training in countering terrorism. We also analyzed the judicial practice, and these results are mainly legal and judicial. However, they allowed us to understand the following. The main aspect of school shooting as a criminal phenomenon is that there is a special subject of this character. So first of all, it should be former or the active student. Second thing is that there is this attack is not personalized. So we see that there is a difference between just a simple actions of violence in our everyday life and the school shooting. Third thing is that there is always idea of killing people. So it's not only about harming, and it's aimed at murdering people. So fourth thing is that it has a special place and a special means. So you need to find weapons, you need to take it to the institution, and the school is always the place of murder. So the school shooting concerns four spheres. These are the social dynamics, the school, the family, and the identity, the personality. So the media is not very constructive in this way. So we have a parallel conjunction between all of this phenomenon. The political motivation is not part of school shooting, or at least it's secondary. So for now, we came to the conclusion that school shooting should not be considered as a murder of terrorist character. Moreover, the terrorist motivation and the use of anti-terrorist prevention concerning school shooting lowers the efficiency of such approach, and in some cases actually can harm youth. So the criminal phenomenon of school shooting, which is of course the threat of extremist character, it requires comparative legal analysis, taking into account all the experience that we have from other countries to create the system of countering this phenomenon. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I would be glad to answer them. Thank you very much, Mikhail. So we basically have about 20 minutes of our session, and we can spend on it on the discussion or on questions and answers, if you like. And in general, if there is no question for now, I can answer the question. So, Semen, the question is to you. So, I also work at school, and for 15 years I faced with the change of attitudes among the students towards radicalism. So the question is the following. Is there a correlation between anti-migrant topic, which is covered in the media, and the rise or the lowering of numbers of such attacks in reality?
Well, I would say that it exists If this is just a discussion on the internet, then it's just a discussion. But if you write it in the Russian newspapers, then this is some sort of the signal that the state is going to pay attention to. Simple question, simple answer. Okay, and I think the same sort of question to you, Mikhail, because thankfully nothing happened like that in the educational facilities where I worked. But how does it correlate with the policy? You know, thankfully in our higher educational facility, nothing like that happened. This is quite a complicated question. It's connected with the perception of the young people of extremism. I'm actually going to start my answer from far. Not all the representatives of the young people know this problem. So this topic became the topic of the research in 2016. And one of the elements was to have a primary research or a poll of the high school students from the majority of educational facilities in Kaliningrad. There were some perception questions, and I would like to say that there was an open answer question. What do you connect the word extremism with? I don't remember the percentage specifically, but maybe around 30% of respondents said that extremism for them is connected with skydiving and sky surfing. Even young people aged 15 and 16. Now we know, given the political events that are happening in our country, they're quite active, politically active. So they don't know the terminology at all. But at the same time, they are the subjects of our political life. So the relevance and the connection between the problem of extremism and the ways discussed in mass media is quite dubious. In my speech today, I've already had a reference to our 2021 research, and I've said that the teachers are usually using TV, but we understand that if we're talking about young people, in my case, since I'm a professor at the university, there's university students, they do not watch TV. This is, of course, I mean, thank God if it's the internet that they're using, but usually it's more close to groups and or Telegram channels or chat boxes, and it's quite difficult to consider when you have different researches and when you consider their attitude towards the processes. Thank you. Okay, so we don't have any other people who want to ask questions. Maybe you, Valerie, have any questions. Well, everything is quite understandable. It's quite interesting. I would like to thank everyone for the participation. From what I understand, Alexander Vladimirovich is here. Colleague, can I ask the question? I have the question for Semen.
Семен Александрович, вот подскажите, пожалуйста, вот вы в вашем докладе...
In your speech, you were talking about the statistics. Is this an official statistics, or is this the research of the content analysis? Please switch on the microphone. Okay. That's what I was talking about at the very beginning. This is usually the materials that I gathered when I was creating the overview of the situation in Russia. So this is what I found in the open sources. No, but my question is whether the open resources are the statistics. We have some open statistics of the higher court, the statistics of the Ministry of Domestic Affairs. In this case, you need to look at different articles. You need to see how much time is spent. What do you mean we don't have the statistics of the higher court? we have the statistics of the higher court according to the criminal cases. Semen, you're talking about the statistics up to 2020, but the federal law of 114 came into force in 2002. That's why I'm asking, what is the statistics that you used in your research? The data that I gathered according to the mass media. So content analysis, the analysis of the mass media information. Okay. And the second question that I have for you is, you're talking about the rapid rise after 2003. There was no surge in 2003. There were maybe 3 or 4 extremist crimes, but after that there was a surge when the statistics was created artificially. They turned on the qualified point and different articles from the criminal code, because we have statistic groups and they are creating the statistics. The way they created this group is that all of these crimes were put in the same basket, so to say. All the crimes where there was an element of extremism or some sort of extremist direction, they were all connected with extremists. And then there was a surge of this crime, and for several years the extremist crime increased from 2003 during 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. It increased by 100 times. I'm sorry, but you're talking about something a little bit different. I said at the very beginning that I'm going to look at something that can be seen and measurable. The decrease, and unfortunately I didn't have enough time to talk about the vandalism. So if we talk, yes, but vandalism is not the extremist related crime, because your topic is called the extremist crime. I would like to say that the monitoring was created within the comparative analysis, comparing to other countries. And in those countries, vandalism was part of the extremist crime. We don't have this kind of crime, but nevertheless, no, we have vandalism and we have hooligan. Yes, the hate crime, yes, but in theory, we need to have a separate speech on that, because this is a debut crime. These are the crimes, the very important crimes that the delinquent career starts with. And when there was a report in 2003 and it was cut, if we can call it that, and shifted it to the administrative part, there was a statistic search of hard crimes, because there was no buffer between the youngsters and the adults. Semen, sorry, I just had some questions, so I had to ask. I had to specify. Could I comment on this? Yes, of course, Alexander. On this topic specifically, Alexander, we have some specifications. The vandalism, the cemetery vandalism can be both, can all be hate-based, starting from 2007. And so the fact that, and what Semen was talking about, me as a person who represents the organization that deals with this kind of things, these are two different areas. One thing is to monitor events that the organization who creates this monitoring sees as the extremist crime, and moreover, we don't even have this kind of term, but the observer can see it as hate crime. but according to the court statistics, is going to be what you were talking about, and this is going to happen because of the bureaucracy reasons. But in reality, something else is going to happen, and unfortunately, the court statistics have a certain technical problem. As you know, it's published by articles of the criminal code, not by points, and so it's very complicated to find it there. They are all going to be in the violent related areas, but it's hard to find them. I'm sorry, I don't see your paternal name, Alexander. I asked the question to Simon just for my understanding. I had these questions just for myself to understand better. In no way did I want to somehow be rude, because the topic that I can read is one thing and the content was a bit different. And second thing that I wanted to say, when I was talking about vandalism, I was talking about part one of simple vandalism as a debut crime. Okay. For some, it's the second part. For some people, it's the even killing is a debut crime. I'm a practicing lawyer, and I have a client. The first case was closed because the parties reconciled, and the second case was also closed. And in a week, he had two other cases: robbery and also car robbery of car sharing. So, you know, what is debut in this case? Okay, so dear colleagues, do you have any other questions to our speakers? Okay, so then I think that we can consider our discussion closed. Those of you who want to continue being in this panel for the next session, I just want to say what is the panel. These are going to be Americans who are saying what they're doing according to the First Amendment to the Constitution. The topic is going to be legal forms of countering radical right and liberal democracy. So those who want to stay with the Americans, you can stay here. And if you want to talk about Russia, then they're going to be in the first stream. And on our second stream, this is second stream. Okay, now I'm mixing it up. Okay, then on the second stream, we're going to have legal forms of countering radical right and liberal democracies. And on another stream, we're going to have practical aspects of combating xenophobia and radicalism in Russia. So you choose where you want to stay. Those who want to listen to Americans and liberal democracy, you can stay here. And those who want to listen about the combating of xenophobia and radicalism, then you can switch to first stream. And then we are staying on the final roundtable on the first stream, and Americans are also going to participate there. And the Rutgers Institute asked to do this, and there we're going to come to conclusions and discuss what is happening right now in different countries. Thank you very much. So we're not saying goodbye. Thank you very much. Thank you. And once again, I apologize if I said something not correct.